In a nutshell, post our production of GuardCon, which is a liability contract, it wasn't a standard. And we were very concerned that although we were covering the liability issues with the BIMCO GuardCon, that these PMSCs needed to have a standard to meet as well. And that started to be addressed about 3 years ago through the International Maritime Organization, who we believe are the prime regulators for the whole of the shipping industry, through a thing called MSC Circular 1443, which was direction to ship owners on how to employ private maritime security companies. The problem is that that is guidance and it's not a standard, so we still weren't quite there. And indeed, the International Organization for Standards, commonly known as ISO, offered to draft a standard for IMO on this, which we supported considerably because we were in the background, obviously having produced GuardCon, and we actually helped draft MSC Circular 1443. So this was an obvious and logical progression to improve the safety and security of seafarers and obviously the vessels by ensuring that these armed guards were the best armed guards, working to the highest possible standards. And that's really the background of where we got to today. It would be churlish to deny that there won't be competitive advantages. I would rather not focus on the competitive advantage for the PMSC. In this sort of interview, I'd rather focus on the advantage for the ship owner. And here what I would say is that the ship owner should use the best possible armed guard companies that are in the marketplace, and the way to identify that is a company that has been independently audited by a third-party auditor. It hasn't been self-regulated, as it were, and the ISO 28007 provides precisely that for the ship owner. It is a high standard. I was actually involved in the drafting of it as a first-class liaison officer to the technical committee of ISO 28000. And I am very confident that the standards that these PMSCs will be showing through this audit are of the highest order. And we are so confident about that we are actually happy to allow those that are ISO 28007 certified who have been audited by a certified body, i.e. even the certification body has been audited, so the auditors are qualified to do the audit. We would allow these companies to become associate members of BIMCO so that we can say internally to our members, huge number of whom are Greek, Greek membership is the largest membership of BIMCO, that here are some bona fide private maritime security companies who have achieved a very high standard, who you can rely on because they have been independently audited. And that, I believe, is the most we can do without actually going down the line that we would rather not see, and that is all of the flag states legislating, which would make it very difficult to operate your ship, because every time you have an armed guard, it's got to work to a different legislation dependent on its flag, which makes life very difficult. So we really do believe this is regulation by voluntary regulation, but through a common process that is internationally recognized, the International Organization of Standards. Well, the prime benefit is that they have been, as I said, they've been independently audited to be working at a high standard. And basically what it will do, it will say to the ship owner, this company is operating legitimately, is using the correct processes to acquire its arms licenses, it is operating to the highest standards as far as its recruiting and vetting of personnel, which is absolutely vital. The last thing a ship owner wants is somebody who is suspect running around his ship with a rifle. You know, we need to ensure that our crews are also kept safe in what is a very demanding situation. And those, I think, are two of the really important prime advantages for the ship owner. He knows that these people have been audited and they are carrying out the correct and legitimate processes, and they've got weapons that they own legitimately. I think you may have gathered we were very keen to see it. And I think the main driver for us as the largest of the shipping trade associations, direct entry associations, is we have a responsibility to ensure that our members, if they are forced down a line by the international community because states cannot meet the requirements of UNCLOS by providing sufficient assets to guarantee freedom of passage of the seas, then obviously a commercial opportunity arises where both parties, the ship owner and the PMSC, want to actually take advantage of that situation. One, for competitiveness, and two, because in many cases the charter is demanding the protection of the vessel and the crew, and quite rightly so in particularly vulnerable vessels. And so we had to find a way of doing that without actually imposing huge amounts of extra regulation on the ship owner and the ship manager. And this was the best way to do it, because the onus is on the private maritime security company to go away and show that they have got these high standards so that we can then recommend these companies to our members. I think there is no doubt about it. As far as piracy in the Indian Ocean is concerned, there hasn't been a successful attack, if I remember correctly, since May of 2012. However, and this is a very big however, there have been a number of attacks, and indeed attacks continue today. And one of the reasons the attacks have diminished is purely a statistical one. As the navies who have been provided by governments to deter and try and defeat piracy have been more and more successful in disrupting and defeating pirate action groups, the numbers of pirate action groups who are prepared to put to sea are getting less and less. So statistically there are going to be less and less attacks. And then on top of that, the large amount of the shipping industry who are effectively applying the best management practices, that is, instigating passive defense measures which deter attacks and in some cases prevent attacks, combined when a vessel is particularly vulnerable with the use of an armed guard, have prevented successful attacks occurring. But all we are doing still, I am afraid, is addressing the symptom. The root cause of piracy, as we all know, is ashore, and the efforts ashore have got to prove successful. There has to be some radical change ashore which provides the ship owner with evidence that attacks aren't going to happen before we can really sit back and relax. So as far as we are concerned, we continue to advocate for the continued application of the best management practices in the high-risk area. Even though that risk may have diminished, there is still a chance. And if you haven't done it and you get attacked, you're going to be the first one that suddenly starts paying a ransom again. Equally, if your vessel is a particularly vulnerable one, we understand if the company wants to use armed guards. That is a fact of life. We can't change that. It's not something we would wish to see in the 21st century, but it's where we are. Equally, we will continue to lobby for naval warships to be around patrolling the area to also to continue to deter, because those three pillars are the things that have led to where we are today. It's a different kettle of fish in West Africa, and it's a growing problem coming back again in the Malacca Straits. So we need to start looking now beyond the Indian Ocean into West Africa very seriously, where there are real problems because a huge amount of these attacks occur inside national territorial waters of sovereign states. And that means the sovereign state law applies. You can't use armed guards unless they belong to the sovereign state. And indeed, we've got to start looking at how better to prepare ships with passive defense measures to deter attacks and encourage those states to do more to counter piracy. That is actually happening. I know that's being done, but in the meantime, vessels are getting attacked, and the attacks in West Africa, oddly enough, are actually possibly more violent. As far as the Malacca Straits again, there have been recent incidents in last 2 to 3 weeks of vessels being attacked, and a bit like in West Africa, either the fuel oil being siphoned off if it's a small attack, but in a larger one, the other day, last weekend, a small oil carrier was taken, hijacked, and the whole of the diesel oil siphoned off, taken away in another vessel, and the vessel left. We have got to start addressing these things in those areas too.